Finally.
Everyone, we're here to spend some time and get to meet somebody new. The Fellowships of Canada. And oh, 1 second. Okay, I'm not sure if I can do that. We'll see. He is the director of Hasbara Fellowships of Canada. His name is Daniel Koren. Daniel's with us right now. Hello, Daniel.
Hello, Rabbi Rothman. Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure to have you. I'm going to mute everyone that comes in. So in order to do so, Daniel, you're going to get muted also. So unmute yourself as soon as I do that, if you would.
Sure.
Okay, everybody else should be muted. As I mentioned, Daniel is the head of the Hasbara Fellowships of Canada, which is an organization which he'll explain a bit better than I will, but that works primarily on university campuses where they have students are educated on how to advocate for Israel. These are students who are already pro-Israel, believe in Israel, but are given the ammunition and the information to be able to stand up on university campuses where we all know is a microcosm of the macrocosm that the world is today, which has all types of people who've decided that they want to attack Israel for one reason or another. And we have a real pleasure to have Daniel with us this evening. So Daniel, as we just begin and more people will be joining us through the next few minutes, I'm sure, could you just give us a bit of a background on the organization itself, the format, how it's set up, basically what you do, and then we'll get into some examples.
Absolutely, and I think you put it very eloquently yourself. so that was an excellent start and excellent preview, I would say, to what we do here at Hasbara. And it's exactly that. I would say our mandate is simple. We educate, empower, and train student leaders to advocate for Israel, to fight for Israel. It started in 2001, and we've been sending students since then. So in 20 years, we've sent over 800 Canadian students on an advocacy training program. And the way that it works, Rabbi Rothman, is very simple. We normally, pre-corona, we would be able to send our student leaders to Israel on an advocacy training program unlike any other, I would say. And the reason for this is it is incredibly intensive. It is 17 days long. We take them to the borders of Gaza. We take them to the Syrian borders, to the Lebanese borders. And the reason we do that is for them to get a first-hand experience, to be able to speak to both Israelis and Arabs, to people who are pro-Israel and anti-Israel, so they'll be able to hear both narratives. And we truly believe there's no better way to get an understanding, to be able to advocate for Israel and discuss Israel without being there and without going to these very strategic destinations. So really, we send these students on this program. It is a life-changing experience, I will tell you that. And when they come back, they have a full year on campus where they're doing various different types of efforts to educate other students about Israel. So whether it's building coalitions with other groups on campus, whether it's refuting anti-Israel articles being shared by BDS groups, doing different types of advocacy, which I know you and I will get into throughout this evening. And basically, it is doing the work that needs to be done on campus to fight against, as you mentioned, this very volatile, hostile environment that unfortunately exists when it comes to Jewish students and pro-Israel students on campus. Now, in the age of coronavirus, which I know we're going to be discussing tonight, certainly a lot has changed. Students are going back to campus this year, and most students don't know what it's going to look like. It's going to be a very, very hybrid, weird, virtual, physical space. But the best that we can do is continue moving forward. Everything we've done has been pivoted virtually. We just had an incredible virtual conference where we had hundreds of students from across Canada, United States, and Israel. And, our students, there's a lot of opportunities we can see here as well.
Yeah, it definitely is a great introduction. Now with COVID, of course, you're not able to take that trip to Israel, where everybody gets to be introduced. And of course, you'll have to do it here. You did mention to me about a conference that you participated in. That was let me see how you put it. It was actually
Oh, yes, please.
virtual summit, a
Yes.
virtual summit. So can you tell us a bit about that and how, to the best of your ability, you were able to convey the information in such through, I guess, through Zoom and other ways rather than actually being there?
Of course, it would be my pleasure, and I'm seeing doubles of you. I'm
Yeah,
I'm very fortunate.
that means somebody who is also a teacher is using my name.
So no, it's an excellent question, Rabbi Rothman, and truly, it's very challenging to be able to replicate that experience of actually going to Israel and actually going to these destinations and speaking to the people there and learning about the experiences. But I believe that we were absolutely able to do the next best thing by bringing Israel to the students. And in fact, because we were concerned of Zoom fatigue, we actually hosted the whole conference on Bizibo, which is a high-tech Israeli startup company that is a lot more interactive, and there's more opportunities for workshops, for simulations, and we had students participate in every single way that they normally would in Israel, but virtually. We had mock Knesset simulations. We had simulations where students, our fellows participating, were in an experience where, hey, Israel is about to be at war with its northern neighbors. You're all members of the of the government here, of the Knesset. How would you react? And there's different people that have different positions, and it's different, I would say, than any Zoom or type of experience where you're just sitting and watching, because it has to be interactive. You have to be participating, and because we want to make sure that our students are really getting everything they can out of the experience. So there were various sessions and workshops. We had fantastic speakers. We had Hillel Neuer, the director of UN Watch. We had Yossi Klein-Alevi, a brilliant author who just spoke just a very heartfelt, beautiful address he gave about the need for Israelis and Arabs to work together, and the peace between Israel and UAE in our lifetime certainly gives us some hope. We had Michael Oren, former ambassador, John Baird under Stephen Harper, the former Foreign Affairs Minister of Canada, and so many other speakers, Rabbi Rothman, who really were able to educate and empower not just our students, but for the first time ever, we were able to have members of the community on as well. So hundreds of community members and supporters of Hasbara were able to also get this experience and see, hey, we've been funding Hasbara and been supporters of Hasbara for so long, and we were able to show them firsthand, this is directly where your funds go towards art programming with students, towards enlightening students, empowering students. There's various questions students will ask. Obviously, there's talks of annexation this year. There's various political talks that are always happening in Israel, and our students need to be able to have these type of conversations in a confident way. In fact, 94% of Hasbara fellows say after participating in our program that they feel more confident to talk about Israel. And there's many examples I can give you to that effect, but I'm sure we'll get there.
Okay. All right, thank you. So let's talk about some of the things that you've been involved recently. I know, I think everyone's heard about the food vendors, debacle that we had here, that and what they, how they actually said no Zionists allowed within their restaurant, and the response of the Jewish community seemed to be very strong on this. And Hasbara was also very seriously involved with this. Could you tell us some of the things that Hasbara did in relation to this and the outcome of it?
Yes, absolutely. And I would just want to reiterate that it was so wonderful to see this solidarity between members of Canada's Jewish community, members of Toronto's Jewish community, really various organizations, everyone finding an angle, finding a way to help out and to contribute. Hasbara was actually one of the first organizations to have put out a statement and put out a detailed press release educating some of the members of the community and educating members of the media what was going on. As you said, she said Zionists not welcome. She painted all Zionists, which represent, as you know, the vast majority of Canadian Jews in this country. She painted them all with a single stroke, called us all greedy and entitled. She said, that Zionists are all racist, Zionists are Nazis, which is, to me, the most vulgar statement a person can make. And I think Rabbi Rothman, you could tell that she was not apologetic whatsoever. There were many members of our community who were messaging her sincerely and saying, hey, you know what you're doing is wrong. People are being very offended, being upset. Holocaust survivors are being hurt by your words. And she just doubled down on publicly attacking, anyone who messaged her and tried to reason her. So Hasbara, I would say, was very active on this case. We had messaged Ambrosia Natural Foods, and they had removed and cut ties with food vendors. We also contributed in the campaign to reach out to Uber, DoorDash, Ritual, literally any platform that was using, her goods and services, and they all cut ties. If you follow her on Instagram now, you'll see that she's basically, asking for donations every single day because, she's been hurt, and rightfully so, after targeting, Canada's Jewish community in this way. The fact that she's even allowed to stay in business to me is already quite repulsive. But our students, and I would have to say, I'm so proud of our students that the second they saw this on Instagram, the second they were walking by on Bloor Street and they saw that this is what she was posting, they were in touch with me right away. They were in touch with our staff right away. And again, they asked, what can we do to educate others about this? Because the goal of Hasbara is not to find BDS activists and anti-Israel activists and have arguments with them, and especially on campus, because the majority of the time you're not going to change their minds. The goal of Hasbara, and the goal, I believe, of advocacy is to find those people who are misinformed, apathetic, unaware, of the Arab-Israeli conflict, of anything to do with Israel. And this is what we teach our fellows to do, to find the majority of students on campus who don't know anything about it, and you introduce them to it in a way that is objective, that is real, and that also shows that what the BDS movement is trying to do is simply demonize and delegitimize an entire group of people. And to see these students come after food vendors in this way because they saw what she was doing was hateful, is really a testament to the fact that they're absorbing all of this information and utilizing it in a productive way.
All right. Well, certainly the role of Hasbara was noted by many people, and it was certainly, I agree that it was something that your students made a difference. They didn't stop her. She's still out doing what she's doing, but at least the public realizes that in the end, she's more of an advertisement for us than against us, because she talks about how terrible we are to such an extent that anybody who knows, members of the Jewish community, knows that what she has to say has no basis or foundation in truth. And yes, therefore, the things that she does say that you might want to normally debate with a person who believes in the BDS or feels that Israel is acting incorrectly with the Palestinians, there's no grounds to debate her. So certainly what Hasbara did was very helpful. But there was another example that we spoke about, which was at the University of Toronto. There was, I don't have all the facts straight, so I'm going to have you tell the story and then what you did. But that Hasbara was very involved with an actual terrorist who was asked to speak at the university campus, which is not somebody who just is sympathetic to terrorism or somebody who philosophically states that terrorism might be acceptable, but this is someone who actually did it, who actually is a terrorist. Right? So maybe you could tell us a bit about that.
Yes, absolutely, and that's truly reprehensible that this happened at all. It was at the start of last year at the University of Toronto St. George campus, and an anti-Israel student group, Students Against Israeli Apartheid, they call themselves, had invited a man by the name of Issam al-Yamani. And Issam al-Yamani was a self-admitted former member of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the PFLP, which is a recognized terror entity in Canada. So much, in fact, that he was ordered deported by the government of Canada. And in 2014, he had given a speech in downtown Toronto where the CBSA, the agency tasked with protecting Canadians, deemed him a danger to the security of Canada. There was a lot of incriminating evidence against him. Years later, there was a global news investigation on him, on Issam al-Yamani, saying, why is this man still here? The government has tried over and over again to deport him. Why is he still here? So it was this man that the Students Against Israeli Apartheid group at U of T St. George invited to come to speak to their campus. And I'll tell you, because for Hasbara especially, we always try to be proponents of free speech. I personally am not a fan of cancel culture and try to avoid it whenever possible. Under my predecessor, Rob Walker, for example, when we had a talk with Norman Finkelstein, we didn't ask that the talk be removed. We had asked that the university condemn his anti-Semitic remarks. In the case of Mr. Alimani, however, this was an actual terrorist, which to me threatened the security of Jewish and Israeli students that attend U of T. So we were able to do a national campaign that educated others about this issue. And after global news coverage, we were able to successfully make enough noise that the event unfortunately was not canceled. The QP offices in downtown Toronto were happy to offer this former terrorist, a venue, but we were very pleased in that students on campus were not subjected to this man and that he was not on a campus where he could have, presented a threat. And this is, the type of individuals that we are dealing with here when these anti-Israel groups, I call them anti-Israel, I don't call them pro-Palestine, because none of the content that they promote is pro-Palestine. It's all anti-Israel, right? If you look at the name, Students Against Israeli Apartheid, Palestine's not even in the name, right? There's nothing to do with Palestine. Their mandate isn't to promote dialogue between Palestinians and Israelis or to try to come to some sort of understanding. Their mandate is to demonize Jews and Israelis, and they do that by inviting the most vile individuals you could think of. And fortunately, in this case, we were able to ensure he wasn't speaking on campus. There's been many other many other incidents that were similar to this, but in my opinion, someone like this, an actual self-admitted member of a terrorist organization, is not the type of person that warrants an invitation, to a campus by a student club.
Yeah, certainly. And I think, again, the work of Hasbara certainly made a world of difference in this case so that people understood and understand who he is, and who he was, and hopefully it'll make him that much less effective in what he does.
Amen.
We hear a lot when these discussions are going on where we always tell people when you speak and you attack Zionists, very often that's just a veiled anti-Semitism. And often the people who are, the anti-Zionist will often say that that's just what you Jews say. You just say that, I'm not an anti-Semite. I'm against Zionism. As far as I'm concerned, I have no issue with Jews. But we continually say that there is a relationship between the two, that when a person attacks Zionism, that they're cloaking what is and really anti-Semitism. I was wondering if you might want to just elaborate that a bit, because to the common person, they have a point, right? That it is possible to say that I have nothing against Jews, but I don't believe in Zionism. And nevertheless, we do say that there's an equation, that they are equating the two. And I think we have a basis for it, but maybe you could explain that a bit and explain our point of view.
Absolutely. And I would agree with you that I think this is why, this is why education is so incredibly important, and why we are, an education organization first, because unfortunately these issues do exist. And the anti-Israel side, the BDS side, has done a good job at normalizing, this notion that there's something wrong with Zionism, or that Zionism and Judaism are completely separate, which, as most Jews know, they are not, right? And the reason for that is, as any Jewish person knows, when we talk about next year in Jerusalem, when we talk about Israel as members of the Jewish community, we understand the connection that exists between Israel, the land of Israel, and the Jewish people that far predates any sort of political Zionism. Any single Jewish person who has been to Bet Knesset once, is aware of this term, right? So the matter really is coming down to education, coming down to the fact that, especially in Canada, the Jewish community here identifies as Zionist. And I always like to refer to a landmark survey, which was co-written by Rhonda Lenton, the president of York University, which was a landmark survey of Canadian Jews. And this survey found that unlike in the United States, actually, Canada's Jewish community is a lot stronger. And also, it is a lot more supportive of Israel. In fact, at least 80% of Canadian Jews have been to Israel. And most of us have no problem, with Canada's current strong relationship with the Jewish state. So that says to me, right there, we need to explain what Zionism is, right? People say, Zionism is this racist apartheid, this thing that negates the experience of Palestinian Arabs. And as Jewish people are aware of, that has nothing to do with Zionism. Zionism is the belief that we have the right to self-determination on our ancestral lands, period. Most Zionists I know are in favor of a two-state solution, are in favor of, none of them want to kick out the Palestinian Arabs that currently live there. In fact, most Zionists and every single Jew I know that lives in Israel, all my family lives in Israel, they all have Arab friends, and they all live closely and work closely with one another, right? So when we talk about this term apartheid, right, and you think, okay, well, where is the real apartheid? You had 850,000 Jews across the Middle East. You had Jews where my family's from Central Asia, from Iran, from Lebanon, from Syria, from all over the Middle East. 850,000 Jews, and now there's a couple of thousand, across the whole Middle East. So where does the apartheid really exist, right? And that's why what we try to do with our students, Rabbi Rothman, is we understand that especially for campus, students don't always want to get into a political conversation. Students don't want to talk about Netanyahu or Trump or even Justin Trudeau. There's certain strategies you need to take, when you're engaging other students. And that's where we found where we speak about Israel in a way that they never would have known before. For example, there's a charity that Hasbara works with quite often called Save a Child's Heart that treats Syrian victims of war and other victims in the Middle East and bring them to Israel. Even if those countries are at war with Israel, they're treated in Israel. And when students introduce other non-Jewish students about these type of organizations, when they introduce to the wonders of Israel Aid, who have helped in Haiti, in Syria, and every single war-torn country, it introduces them to Israel in a way that they didn't know existed. And it shows them that, there has to be two sides here. And that's really all that Hasbara is, right? There is a campaign to demonize and delegitimize Jewish people on campus, and we want to refute that. Where people always say, oh, you're a political organization. I don't see anything political about what we do. We're a human rights organization. We're against anti-Semitism, and we support the rights of Israelis and of Jews to have equal rights like all other Canadians, right? And if we're able to have these conversations and have this dialogue, which is really what we encourage our students to do, and that's why confidence is so incredibly important. And I'd want to even share one story. We had one fellow, her name was Daphne Kleiman. She was from Brazil, not Canadian, but she got accepted into school at St. Mary's University in Halifax, Nova Scotia, of all places. And when she came there weren't many other Jews. There were no other Zionists on campus, at least no other vocal Zionists. But because she, was actively searching for questions about Israel and how to talk about Israel, she came across Hasbara. Our wonderful staff, Yessi, had gotten in touch with her, and she decided she wanted to join the Hasbara program. And when she came back to her campus, she was by far the loudest and most vocal Israel activist out there. And most importantly, that she always spoke about, she was able to have conversations with students. There was an anti-Israel professor that she had, and that she constantly would stand up and argue with the professor. And the professor always didn't treat her, I would say, with the utmost respect. And Hasbara was always involved there. And she would tell me with pride that as soon as she left the classroom, and if she was upset about it, there were students, Muslim students, students of various cultures and religions and what have you, who came and they said, what, I'm so pleased that you had brought that up. I understand where you're coming from. There's obviously both narratives here, and it's important to hear where you're coming from as well. And she was able to succeed, in opening people's minds and saying, hey, don't listen to everything this professor is saying, because there's always more, and she was able to achieve in doing that because she got the confidence necessary, to speak up, to understand, what's accurate, what's inaccurate, what's propaganda, what isn't, what's legitimate criticism of Israel, and what is demonization, double standards, and delegitimization. And there's a big difference there, right? And if you this is why I think, adopting the IHRA definition is so important as a tool, because it really gives that guideline, of where does criticism turn into straight up anti-Semitism, right? And this is something that has existed for a long time. So again, the need for education is so vital, and to see our students being able to have these conversations and do, real work in terms of introducing other students to Israel in a real and balanced way, that's all we're trying to do.
I see. So since you spoke about this definition of anti-Semitism, would you be able to paraphrase it for us? I don't expect you to have memorized it, but to explain to us why people consider this such an important thing to ratify in various bodies, be it political, government, or even social service.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you asked. I actually wrote an article about this in the National Post last year about the need for universities to adopt the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. And the reason it's so vital, Rabbi Rothman, is the conversation that we're having right now. And unfortunately, because anti-Semitism is the world's oldest hatred, there has always been new manifestations of it. And there are now, naysayers who claim no, we can't be anti-Semitic. Like the one that always gets me is when you see, now there's been a proliferation of anti-Semitism, unfortunately, coming from radical supporters of Louis Farrakhan, right? And Louis Farrakhan claims that Jews aren't the real children of Israel, that the Nation of Islam, the children of the Nation of Islam are the real children of Israel, that, and that Black Americans are the real children of Israel. So you'll see these people promoting outright anti-Semitism and saying, oh, no, we can't be anti-Semitic. We're Semites. You're not the real Semites, right? And this is the reason that you need to have this conversation. People don't understand what this term means. People see anti-Semitism. This is why I use it without a dash. People see that and they think, oh, that means you're against all Semites, so all Semitic peoples, right? And again, you need to be knowledgeable to understand that no, anti-Semitism is not talking about anti-Semitic peoples. It is talking about specifically the hatred of Jews. It is a term that was coined, in Germany, that meant Judenhass. It was a scientific term for Jew hatred, Judenhass, that they coined in English into anti-Semitism. But it never had the meaning, right, to be against any other different type of people. And this is why having the IHRA definition is important, because because it successfully explains that. It gives various examples on what is legitimate criticism and what is anti-Semitism. For example, when you say that referring to the IDF or Israelis as Nazis, right, is anti-Semitic, the reason is that Nazis is a deliberate term. There's no one more evil than Nazis in the public perception. Even terrorists do not have the same ramifications as Nazis. So when you're trying to normalize this notion that Jews having as a state, is akin to them being Nazis, right? You're vilifying them in the most horrendous way, and you're vilifying the entirety of Jewish people who live in that land. And that's what makes it anti-Semitic, right? You can say, hey, I disagree with these policies. I disagree that that Israel is doing this. I don't support Netanyahu. Great. A lot of Zionists I know don't support Netanyahu. The problem is, again, these anti-Israel groups, they are not promoting a just criticism of the Jewish state. They are outright promoting demonization and delegitimization, and that's where it turns into anti-Semitism. So the IHRA definition provides various examples where you can understand specifically, if you're someone outside of this community, if you're someone that doesn't know anything about Judaism or anti-Semitism, the definition gives that to you. It is a guideline, right? It is a simple guideline. And this is why we want universities to adopt it, is so that they can understand when Students Against Israeli Apartheid is demonizing the entirety of Canadian Jews, when they say that Zionists are Nazis, that they're bringing terrorists that have wanted to kill Jews. This is anti-Semitism. If a university administration claims, oh no, it's political, they can do it, they're just talking about Zionism. So we need to explain to them, no, here is the most up-to-date guide, right, on anti-Semitism, on what constitutes anti-Semitism. And this is how you can better understand how to combat, this anti-Semitism, because the studies speak for themselves. BDS leads to the targeting and harassment of Jewish students, right? These things are happening in the name, of anti-Israel activism, but it's always Jewish students that are being targeted. That's why I wrote a piece once in the Canadian Jewish News, maybe one day we'll see her come back, that said that BDS actually isn't about economic discrimination at all. BDS is in Israel, in the Arab world, nobody talks about BDS. It's a diaspora issue. It's an issue that affects Jewish students specifically, in Canada and the United States and Europe. It is not something that is as prevalent in Israel. And this is something that we need to understand, that this movement is targeting Jews in the diaspora specifically. So when we want to see IRA being adopted, we want to see universities have a better understanding. We want to see governments have a better understanding. Like right now, Ontario is, poised to hopefully pass Bill 168. The reason why Ontario is looking to pass that is so that it can be guided, by the IRA definition to understand what constitutes an act of anti-Semitic hate and what does not. And for anyone who claims that the IRA definition is going to stifle free speech, you read the first sentence on the page and it says to you, criticism that can be considered to be levied at any other country and levied towards Israel cannot be considered anti-Semitic. Criticism towards Israel cannot be considered anti-Semitic. And this is why I believe an IRA definition, and most, I'd say, advocates in the Jewish community support the IRA definition, is because the term has got too convoluted. So social media has been able to spread propaganda and misinformation in ways we haven't seen since the Third Reich, and definitions like this are important. And I'll leave you also with this, Rabbi Rothman. When you see members of outside communities talking about what should be or shouldn't be anti-Semitism, you would never see a non-Muslim discuss what constitutes Muslim hatred. You would never see a non-Black person discuss what constitutes black racism, because you can't speak to it if you haven't had those experiences. Only a Muslim person will be able to explain what is anti-Muslim hatred. Only a Black person will be able to explain what is racism against Blacks, and only a Jewish person can tell you this is anti-Semitism, this is not. And this is the reason for the IRA definition.
I see. So it certainly is, every time that a government agency or education institution ratifies this, then it's a great step forward. Right?
Yes,
it's a tool for us that we can use to be able to show what, that anytime somebody criticizes Zionism does not mean that they're anti-Semitic, but it very often does. It just isn't. It isn't, carte blanche, and it's always that way. And that's really a good point.
And that's the problem, right? If we're not seeing, I mentioned that these pro-Palestinian activists are usually anti-Israel, and the focus is always on isolating, right, and vilifying the Jewish state. If these were true advocates of human rights and justice, then you would see them spend equal time on any country that actually promotes human rights abuses. The reason you don't see it, and this is why they're called out for being anti-Semitic, is because they only want to focus on one Jewish student, one Jewish state only, right? You don't. I have never seen students against Israeli apartheid or students for justice in Palestine, talk about the dire conditions that Palestinian refugees in Lebanon are in, hundreds of thousands of them who don't have equal rights, that they're not recognized as Lebanese citizens. You've never seen any conversation about that. You've never, and this is the problem. There is an agenda, Rabbi Rothman. If in the wake of BLM and now especially after George Floyd's murder, it was terrible to see these anti-Israel activists, as always, appropriate whatever movement is happening and use it to promote their anti-Semitic agenda. And this is exactly what has been happening. There have been anti-Israel groups that are using BLM to say, hey, police officers get training in Israel and promote all sorts of falsehoods and things that aren't correct in the slightest, and they're able to get away with it because they promote it on social media. And it's the misinformation wars at this point. It really is. And as we're entering a virtual year, as we're entering a year where more and more people are going to be on social media because there's less interactions in person, doing this type of work on social media has never been more vital. And that's a lot of how we've been pivoting at Hasbara, is to make sure that our students are being as active on social media as possible. You might have heard of an app called TikTok. I don't understand how it works, but all the youth are on it. And TikTok is an interesting platform because this is where anyone under the age of 20 is on this platform. It's millions and millions of people. And the interesting thing is that it is a randomized algorithm, meaning you see videos based on their popularity, not based on who you follow. So when we have some of our social media, some of our fellows who are actively doing, social media videos on TikTok, some of their videos where they're educating others about Israel, about the Jewish people, about why anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are the same, this is getting out to people who wouldn't normally be able to see this type of content. And that's actually one of the positive things about using an app like TikTok to get out to your audience. So we've been offering more training, for our students. We've been offering various experts and, various people who can speak to Facebook, Twitter, creating videos, creating graphics, engaging your audience, talking about Israel, explaining and communicating for Israel, anything really that you can do to be able to grow your base and most importantly, not exist in an echo chamber, in a bubble where everyone is one and the same, because you really want to be able to make meaningful change by reaching people, who aren't aware, who are not informed about the Arab-Israeli conflict.
I see. So before we conclude, it was a big surprise to me, excuse me, although perhaps it's because I'm not as well tuned in, when the announcement was made about the relationship and between the United Arab Emirates and Israel, which was something that I never expected I would see or hear. I had no idea anybody was ever working on it or thought.
No way.
So now that it's happened, can you explain to us on a political level and more on an Israeli level what the purpose was, what the benefit is, what is the statement that it's making to the world that is something that is making it such an important thing?
I think it's making the same statement that Israel has always been making. We want peace. That is as simple as it comes. And that is the statement I believe Israel has always been trying to make. And, from a political perspective, there's a million theories, and there are many who claim that, annexation was never going to happen to begin with. And many were claiming that Bibi was going to use it as a strategic tool. And it could appear to be that was the case. In any event, the historical significance of the third Arab country to create peace with Israel could even be, and who knows, but could even be more significant than Egypt and Jordan, because the UAE is a massive powerhouse of a country in the Gulf states. And within 48 hours, you're already hearing talks about Morocco, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and other Gulf states, to talk about normalizing relations with Israel. I'll tell you, it wasn't surprising to the people who are in the Israel advocacy community, because we have been seeing stories of Israel and the Gulf states working together for years and years and years and years, especially over their shared, over the threat of Iran. That is a common bond between the Gulf states and Israel, and Saudi Arabia and Israel, and UAE and Israel. But this is something we've been seeing a long time. And I think for those in the know, it wasn't entirely surprising, though it still was incredible. It wasn't, because we know that they've been working on this. And, something that we do, Rabbi Rothman, I think is so important, is we bring Muslim activists to speak to our Jewish and non-Jewish fellows. And we had an incredible activist, a Syrian refugee, in fact, by the name of Aboud Dandachi. I'm sure many of you on the call would have heard of him. And Aboud and many other, Arabic-speaking individuals who read Arabic language news have been saying to me and so many others that the Palestinian cause hasn't been a huge cause in Arabic-speaking media, and that it's much more of a cause in the West than it is there, and that many Arabic people at this point are sick of this perpetuation of the conflict, that they want to get over it, that they want to make peace with Israel, that they see there is no more need for this. The Israelis and the Jews are not going anywhere. And there is a lot to be gained between Israel and the UAE having a relationship like this. I already read the forecast from an economical perspective that saw hundreds of millions in dollars being spent and through tourism and whatnot between both peoples, which is already wonderful. But I think it shows, most importantly, symbolically, that Israel wants peace. When Netanyahu said too that we're putting annexation, that we're putting it on the back burner, he said instead we want peace. We want to find more countries who are willing to come to the table. And the more it is normal that Israel has this normalization of ties with all of these Arab countries, the more that there won't be much, that the Palestinians will be able to do, but finally come to the table, finally recognize that there is a Jewish state, that they're not going anywhere, and let us come to some sort of terms. Because, otherwise you're just going to continue to have Hamas there, and you're going to continue to have the Palestinian Authority with no elections and living in peril the way that they do, right? And so I think most advocates and most people in the community are incredibly excited by this. I think they see that the Middle East is changing, and when the Middle East changes for real and the rest of the world gets to see it, maybe people will finally understand that Arabs and Jews can get along. We do get along. We don't need to continue to fight like this. And I think it really spells for a brighter future, Be'ezrat Hashem.
Well, it was a big news to me, and give me the opportunity perhaps one day to fly over there and see what it's like. It's supposed to be quite a place to be.
To Dubai, yes. I would love to as well, absolutely.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like it. So I want to just take this opportunity to thank you for your time. We've appreciated very much, both here on Zoom and the people watching on Facebook, who are all participating and listening to what you have to say. And it's important people should realize the importance of an organization like Hasbara Fellowships. In fact, why don't you, as you're about to leave, tell me, what is this superstars? What does this mean? I heard about this superstars that you guys won. What is that?
Thank you. So, well, since the demise, unfortunately, of the CJN, as I'm sure you know, there are two, Jewish Canadian publications that have been, providing that important service to the community. And one of those publications is the J.ca, and they ran a piece called 13 Canadian pro-Israel superstars that you need to follow. And I was very touched and validated that they had included me on the list, but I was actually much more proud when I learned that two of our active Hasbara fellows were on that list as well. And one of them, Isabella Hazan, is a 20-year-old. She's a law student at University of Ottawa. She's from Montreal. And she actually, I was already speaking about her earlier when I was talking about TikTok. Her especially she's created quite the following and really put her Hasbara social media training to good use. So she was rightfully recognized by the JA for being a superstar, an Israel advocate superstar. And another one of our fellows is Jake Resnick. He's in Vancouver, and he is a free speech activist, a Zionist activist, a proud Hasbara fellow at his campus, and he's done so much good work for the human rights of all individuals, of Muslims, of Jews, of any victims of oppression whatsoever. He truly doesn't have a bad bone in his body, and they were both, alongside me, listed on this, 13 Canadian superstars. And the fact that 3 of 13, were representatives of Hasbara, to me really speak volumes, to the importance of our organization and, what we're trying to achieve in terms of empowering student leaders. And it was definitely validating to see that. I thanks for bringing it up.
No, it's my pleasure. So I think now that people should have now a bit of a better idea of the significance of Hasbara fellowships here in Canada, and the work that you do. And we know that, when things happen, we're in good hands on the university campuses and in the newspapers, of having people who are well educated to be able to stand up and to tell the truth about what's really going on in Israel, and not to allow people who have ulterior motives and ulterior reasons to demonize Jews and Israel. And I'm proud to be able to know that we're associated with Hasbara Fellowships and all the good work that you do. So again, I want to thank you for your time and joining with us tonight. And I'm sure that those who have been watching we'll know who to turn to in the times of need, or when we're looking in the newspaper and something comes up, and then the next day will be an editorial from Daniel Koren. So we'll look forward to seeing more of those.
Rabbi Rothman, thanks so much for having me. I truly appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Have a wonderful night, Daniel, and everyone who joined with us, both on Facebook and on Zoom. We're glad to have you. We look forward to seeing you all in the future. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful night. Thank you. Good night.